I'm just doing just fine, Royce, and I'm glad to be on your program.
Well, I was glad to have you on my program. This is a, pretty important subject to me. I know that there's a lot of religions out there, and, well, I think you and me both know, after a little bit of research, that can't all of them be the one true path to God. They probably all have a little bit of the way. You just have to figure out which is and which is not. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I think people need to know that, because I think they can get a more rounded life with their walk with God if they try to look around in more than just one religion, in other words.
Yeah, and I think in the end, it's going to boil down to an individual choice. I can't see everybody coming into full agreement on which religion or which God is right. So people have to have the freedom to make their own choices. And I myself, I'm all for that. I'm not a religious person myself. Although I do believe in God, I don't believe that man has properly defined God. So I don't follow any particular religion.
I don't either.
Okay. So, like I was brought up in the Islamic faith, and I did 5 prayers a day and the whole thing coming up as a youth. But as I got older and began to think more inquisitively and maturely, I became dissatisfied with that and Christianity, Judaism. Well, every religion that I investigated, none of them satisfied me. Now with my books, the main focus of my books, I deal with the interpretation of biblical mythology, because the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah, they're not actually historical books, as I see it and as many others see it, but they're books of mythology. And so when one investigates my books, they will see that a lot of references to the Bible. But what I say in reference to the Bible in my books, it applies to the Quran, and it applies to the Torah, the Tanakh, and all of the monotheistic books, and that's one thing I want people to understand, because some people, when they hear my name, the Muslim name, they think it's a Muslim making an attack on Christianity, which is not the case. I don't believe in Christianity, and I don't believe in Islam either. I'm a free thinker, and although we use the Bible as our tool for investigation, what I say in my books, it applies to monotheism in total.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified that, because it'll help people understand you better.
Now, like I was saying, the main premise of my books is that the Bible is not historical, and it's a book of mythology, and that mythology is the child of astronomy, and that mythology has evolved from astronomy, and here today in religion has evolved from mythology. And for instance, when we look at the ancient mythology of the Greeks and Romans, we find their gods by the names of Jupiter, Mars, Vulcan, Apollo, Venus, and other such associated names. It's clear that there's an astronomical connection with the gods that these people worship in their mythology. And the point that I make in my books is that the same applies today with monotheism and other various religions too, but we're focused on monotheism, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, that these gods of our faith, they have astronomical counterparts. And what my books do, they deal with explaining and proving these counterparts. Now, one way to exemplify that problem. But now let's take I just want to make an overview of one particular subject here. Then we can have a little give and take as you wish, Royce.
Okay.
So the details are in my book, but I just want to make an overview to kind of exemplify the subjects that my books get into. Now, for instance, let's take the Garden of Eden saga in the Bible. Now, we know with that tale, we have a situation of Adam and Eve, supposedly the first human pair, and we find them in a garden of delights with a talking snake, with a tree that has knowledge, with another tree of life. Now, this particular tale, I think most rational people will agree, excuse me, I have to take a sip of tea there. I think most rational people will agree that the tale cannot be literally true, although there are fundamentalist Christians and Muslims who say it has to be true. But I think most of us who think rationally about that scenario depicted in the Bible know that it just cannot be true. And now either it's just total nonsense for a rational thinking person, or it must be symbolic of something. And what we do with astro-mythology, with scenarios like that depicted in the Bible of Adam and Eve, we search the ages and the eras of the heavens, and we try to find some correlations so that we can find the cosmic or astronomical counterparts to this talking serpent, to this tree of life, to the tree of knowledge and good and evil, and to Adam and Eve. And by finding these correlations, then we're able to break the symbol, decode the symbol, and make some type of rational sense out of that story. And I'm going to give an overview of the definitions which I have found in my research on this subject. And now within my book, there are graphs and there are charts and there are references for other sources to get information to corroborate the assertions made in the book. But what I'll have to do now in explaining this particular tale, this particular fable, is to just give an overview of it. But now with this tale here, with Adam and Eve in the Bible, which makes no sense literally, I think most of your audience, would agree with that. In searching for correlations to the event described, when we go back about 8,000 or 9,000 years to the astrological age of Gemini, which that astrological age, it came on about 6,606 BC, if my memory is correct. I have a chart of all these ages, astrological ages, in my books, of course. But an astrological age, of course, that is referring to which particular zodiac constellation is occupying the vernal equinox in any given era. And the astrological ages, they go from, they measure 2,160 years. That means that a particular zodiac sign is occupying the vernal equinox for that period of time. And 6,606 BC, we find Gemini coming to the collar of the vernal equinox. Now, also at that time, in 6,606 BC, some other coordinates that are used extensively in astro-mythology or astrotheology are the circumpolar stars. The circumpolar stars, the stars which and constellations which revolve around the polar hub, the celestial polar hub. These are non-setting stars. At the same time that Gemini was coming into play at the vernal equinox, the constellation of Draconis was coming into play at the amongst the circumpolar stars. And the circumpolar stars, you got about 6, 7, 8, 9 constellations, whatever, that are constantly visible because of their positions at the north celestial pole. Now, what we need to do in order to make some sense out of the Adam and Eve scenario given in the Bible is to make some correlations between the positions of the stars during the era of Gemini, because, like I said, we have found that is the era that matches this story in the Bible, and the various components of the Garden of Eden saga. And I'll do that pretty quickly as an overview, and striking details are in my book, as I said before. But now, okay, we have the talking snake of Genesis. Now, this talking snake, it can be correlated to the constellation of Draconis, the dragon constellation. That constellation is known as the dragon, is known as the serpent, is known as a constellation in the mythology I'm talking about, is known as a rather demonic constellation. And that constellation, we can prove and have proved, has correlations to the talking snake in the Genesis of the Bible. Now, we notice that the Bible tells us that this serpent in Genesis, it was wrapped around the tree and communicated with Eve and Adam from that position. Now, two other major components of the circumpolar era, by which it is demarcated, are the celestial pole and the pole of the ecliptic. The celestial pole, of course, is an extension of the Earth pole into the heavens. And the pole of the ecliptic being the pathway of the sun, apparently around the Earth, and its pole, of course, is 90 degrees from the ecliptic. So the pole of the ecliptic and the celestial pole are about 23.5 degrees apart. But the point is, that helps bring great clarity to this myth in the Bible, is that the constellation Draconis is a winding, twisting constellation. And when you look at the charts that shows this constellation in the sky, it actually wraps around the pole of the ecliptic. Hence, by giving meaning to another component of the Eden saga, if we substitute the term pole for tree, and we got to think in terms of how the ancients thought thousands of years ago when they viewed these heavenly apparitions, and using descriptions for them that were germane to their environment, we can see the pole of the ecliptic as actually a tree, and Draconis wrapped around the tree, and this gives meaning to the serpent within Genesis wrapped around the tree. The constellation of Draconis wrapped around the pole of the ecliptic in the heavens. Now, the Bible also says that there was a tree of life, that there's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Now, the other tree, of course, is the celestial pole of the earth. Now, the celestial pole, as we mentioned earlier in the conversation, the stars that revolve around the celestial pole, they never set. They're there constantly. We know that our other stars, they come and go. We don't look at the same stars overhead from month to month, except for the circumpolar stars. They never set. They are there night after night, season after season. And so, although in this time we say they never set, we can see the ancients saying, believing that there were spirits in the heavens and so forth, that those stars never die. They live constantly. They live from season to season, from year to year. They're always seen, the circumpolar stars. So we can see, as envisioning how they saw these things, with the hub that these stars and constellation revolved around, these ever-living stars that never died, this hub was viewed in their picturesque language as a tree of life, which the constellation and stars that never died revolved around. This was a source of that life in their picturesque language. So here we can see, in a brief overview, that a story within the Bible and the Quran and so forth that absolutely has to be viewed as an absolute fairy tale. When we look for correlations on the basis of astrotheology, we can find some matches, some counterparts of the various cosmic components or correlations to the biblical personalities and of Adam and Eve and the serpent and the trees and so forth. This, with a little more knowledge, can help us make sense of the whole saga, the whole story that is given on through the expelling of Adam and Eve from the garden and et cetera, et cetera. We can make sense of this whole scenario by bringing forth correlations from the cosmic arena. So, in a nutshell, I'm trying to give an overview of the type of material that my books delve into.
Right. Well, I would have one question right now. Is there a way to know what the stars, where they were located at back in the days of the beginning?
Is a way to know where they were located at?
Well, yeah, because as time goes on, the constellations in that move, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, actually, yes. In fact, the astronomers, they have charted the heavens. In fact, there are software programs, and really, I think you can go on the internet too to find software programs on the internet, whereas you can pick out various dates going back thousands of years or going forward thousands of years on this astronomy software, and it will give you a picture of how the stars are situated in any particular era. Now, back at the time when I researched this information that I just imparted to you about Draconis and its position in the era that began 6,606 BC, I used some of that astronomy software to get a picture of how the skies looked during that period. And that was when I saw the correlation there. Now, the appearance of the skies in terms of the position of the stars, like you just noted, they're changing at the rate of 30 degrees every 2,160 years. And that breaks down to about 1 degree every 72 years, the appearance of the stars, or I should say the stars shift westward in their positioning. But now, but nowadays we have software that can actually give us a picture of it.
Wow, I'd have to get me some of that software.
Yeah, just go right on the internet and put in the various keywords and you bring it up. I mean, there's software, plenty of software available, and really any book, well, mostly I would say a magazine on stargazing or magazine on astronomy and so forth. Generally, when you buy one of those magazines, they have advertisements in there for astronomy software. And for any era you want, or for any date, I mean, you can go forward 2 or 3 years or thousands of years. It can show you a picture of the sky, the coordinates that would match the date.
So you could go back and find the Star of Bethlehem if you want it.
If you knew what to look for, and like with something like that, the Star of Bethlehem, I wouldn't be looking for that myself. You know, just like with the Bible story of the Star of Bethlehem, that the wise men, they saw this star and they followed it and until it led them to a position where it was over where Jesus lay. But now, when you think about that, that's just absolutely impossible. I mean, for a star to do that, because I mean, we can look up from where we are right now and see a star, and we can go perhaps 500 miles or so forth and look up and see that same star. I mean, a star can't be pinpointed so as to point to an address.
That'd be the same thing as the story of the sun standing still.
Yeah, right. Or sun standing still. Like we're told in the Bible about who was that? Joshua, who called God to help him in this battle, and the sun and the moon stayed in their courses. So these things can be literally true. And actually, I give astrological definitions to the Star of Bethlehem in one of my books. I think it's book 2 of the Astrological Foundation. I explain with cosmic correlation what that actually means, and it's now when that explanation is made within my book, it correlates Jesus. As I said, my books deal with correlations. It correlates Jesus to a sun god. And with Jesus as a sun god, we were able to make sense out of his star signifying where the sun is. So I show in book 2 of the Astrological Foundation of Christ myth how that story of the Star of Bethlehem, so to speak, of finding Jesus, is really referring to a star or group of stars showing the position of the sun where it laid at a particular time. And like I said, the details of that are given in my book. But that's what my book deals with, is interpreting things like that.
Okay. Now, on these here, why would they be telling mythological stories about, say, back in the day of Genesis, about the constellation Dracos? Was it anything to do with the agriculture, or were we supposedly having visitation from there, or what?
That's it, exactly, agriculture. This whole scenario, like I said, mythology is a child of astronomy, and religion is a grandchild, because religion has come to us from mythology, and astronomy was the beginning of it all. But all of it dealt with the tracking of time. We have to go back into prehistory, and we have to try to put ourselves in a position of our ancestors trying to struggle to survive in a sometime hostile environment. And nothing was more important to them than time. They had to know the proper time to plant. They had to know the proper time to harvest. They had to know the proper time to migrate. They had to know the proper time to build shelters against torrential rains or cold weather, or prepare for droughts. And so this led them to charting the heavens, the celestial heavens, the stars, the movements of the sun and the moon and the planets and the stars. This led them to observing the tracks of the heavenly bodies, keeping records of them. Now, of course, when they kept records, to begin with, they didn't have written records, so they kept records in terms of their mythological stories,
right, oral
and
tradition.
their mythological tales and their oral traditions. Exactly. So this is how they kept.
The myths made it easier to remember, but since there was no education back then.
Exactly. There was no education. There was in some cases they hadn't formulated written language, and even if they had, being able to store it and keep it from generation to generation, because whatever knowledge that a generation achieved, they wanted to pass it on, of course, and so it all dealt with the tracking of time. Now, if you look at the biblical holidays, the 7 major Jewish feasts, all of these holidays, they deal with time. They deal with the cardinal points of which are the vernal equinox, and the autumnal.
Yeah, that's why you got Christmas during the winter solstice,
exactly,
Easter during the spring equinox, and the Feast of Tabernacles in September. I think that's what, harvest, or?
Yeah, yes, September, that would be harvest. And like, you know, of course they have, the Jews, the Rosh Hashanah, and the Yom Kippur, and like you say, the Tabernacles, I think they call it Sukkot. All of these things, like you say, they deal with harvest, or they may deal, or I should not say I should say or they're dealing with the position of the sun, which is an indication of harvesting and planting and so forth.
Seed time, harvest time, etc.
Yeah, I mean, so you can see that the original intent of these various festivals were really tracking time so as they could be cued or clued as to when to plant or harvest. And of course, as time went on and religion developed from mythology, of course, these agricultural holidays became religious holidays. But originally, it all dealt with tracking time. So that's why they were interested in the stars and the planets and sun and so forth. It was ordered to track time.
Now,
otherwise,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're okay. I was just going to say, otherwise they would have probably starved to death, not knowing when to plant or harvest.
Right.
Okay, I'm ready.
Now, that makes good sense. Now, what I'm thinking is this same principle, pardon me, must apply to the story of Jesus' birth, because everybody knows that a virgin does not give birth to a child. They already had one story for agriculture, seed time, harvest, etc. So what would be the purpose for the Christ myth?
Yeah, well now, there's more than one category of mythology, of course. And, you know, I'm going to go and give it one, I would say, a solar explanation of what you just asked. But, of course, there's more than that. I mean, we know that literally a virgin cannot give birth. You know, going back to the cardinal points, when we look at, for instance, spring, which comes on March 21, now in the mythology, that particular the vernal equinox is looked at as a time of conception. Now we know that with spring, the earth becomes fertile and is ready for planting and so forth, and it's ready in a sense to receive insemination. You know, even though we may not start planting right at spring, but that point in the astral mythology, that part of the vernal equinox, it's looked at as a point of insemination, of marriage, if you will. And one part of the Bible is referred to as the bridal chamber in the mythology, and we explain that early within the books. But anyway, if you count 280 days from March 21 to December 25th on your calendar, 280 days, and we know that human gestation is 40 weeks, 280 days. If you count from March 21 to December 25th, that is exactly 280 days. So in the astral mythology, we see the sun, when it crosses the vernal equinox at March 21, this is an act of insemination. The heavens inseminating the sun, the marriage of the Father-Son with the heavens, so to speak, so as to produce a child son that is born 280 days, and this is in exact correlation to human gestation on December 25th. And so, that's one very significant correlation there.
Okay, so you might say the myths largely about death and life, birth, death, and maybe even rebirth.
Right. Well, because that's a very good question. Because like I said, there's more than one application to the symbolism. Now, with Jesus Christ, I don't look upon Jesus Christ as a historical figure at all. I mean, we can't find any consistent, credible evidence outside of the Bible or Quran that Jesus actually ever lived, or that Moses, or that Abraham, or any of these fellows. Like I said, these are myths. Written in symbolic stuff. But anyway, in terms of the resurrection, if we look at the cardinal point, the winter solstice at December 22, and we know solstice means stand still, and we can see from December 22 to December 25, when Christ is born. In another phase of the mythology, this actually is referring to the resurrection of the sun, because they looked at the sun when it went into winter solstice. Now that's the lowest point of the sun's trajectory throughout the year, in the winter months of the winter solstice, when it hits the winter solstice. They saw that as the sun going into a grave or into a cave, and it stayed there for 3 days. Now that's a position at either solstice. The sun seems to stay in place 3 days because the solstices are pivoting points. At the lowest point, it hits there, and we can't see its movement back up toward the north until after 3 days. And that was viewed as a resurrection of the sun from the grave of the winter solstice. Now, in the Bible, we have about Jesus being resurrected after 3 days in the grave or cave or what have you. And you can't even find 3 days between being killed on a Friday and resurrected on a Sunday morning. That's about 1.5 or 2 days. But the actual 3 days, that is really symbolism of the sun being resurrected from the position of the winter solstice on December 25th.
Okay. Now, on this here, the astronomical or astrological connection, does that have anything to do with there being 12 tribes and 12 disciples?
Well, yes, indeed. Because now, when we, like you and I were talking a little earlier, before we came on the air, about how when we look back in history at the older religions, they seem to be, in many ways, so similar to what we have today.
Right.
And really, it's because the symbolism hasn't changed. All religions, all of the major religions that I'm aware of, especially monotheism, but not limited to monotheism, they deal with symbolism. In their origination, I'm talking about, they're dealing with the symbolism of the heavens. So this can cause us to find similarity from religion to religion, because they're all symbolic of the same underlying events. So you find in the Old Testament, you find 12 tribes. And, like I said before, this is all mythology. There never was any 12 tribes of Israel. This is just a story that was written up. You can't find any 12 tribes in actual history. I mean, the whole Egyptian slave scenario and so forth, you can't find that in actual history. This stuff comes out of the Bible and Quran. But my point is, you have the 12 tribes of Israel, and this correlates to the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so when you come into the New Testament, you have the 12 apostles. It's the same symbolism. Instead of calling them tribes, I mean, they call them whatever fits the subject matter or the culture or the storyline. They're called apostles. But the 12 apostles, they're symbolizing the 12 zodiac constellation, just like the 12 tribes of Israel were symbolizing the 12 zodiac constellations. It's all the same symbolism.
Okay, so are there any other messages inside of this that we're unaware of?
I tell you now, one thing that comes to my mind that I can mention kind of briefly as to give another example of the type of things we interpret with my books. And like I say, I can just give you an overview because this is really kind of convoluted in a way when you don't have charts and graphs. Within my books, I provide charts and graphs to help the explanation. And of course here, right now, we're just dealing with words and so things can't be as clear. But now, in Genesis of the Bible, for instance, we're told that God created the world in 7 days. Was 6 days of work, and he rested on the seventh day. Now, that, well, you know, like I said, it's plain mythology, so I should not have to prove that it's mythology, but I mean, whoever witnessed God doing that, of course, we're told that it's a revelation from God to Moses, I guess. But really, that the 7-day creation period, or the 6-day creation, 6 days of rest, it itself has potent symbolism referring to the keeping of time, to tracking time. As I said, this whole religious thing, not that it was planned that way, it started with tracking time. It started with astronomy, tracking time, then mythology evolved from astronomy as a symbolic way to keep the records of tracking time. And then when religion finally evolved, it took on the aspects of the mythology and just changed the names of the angels and demons of mythology into the prophets and angels and so forth, and devils, what have you, of religion. It's just a changing of name of the same subjects, as we just discussed with the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles, all referring to the 12 signs of the zodiac. But anyway, the actual what the creation story in Genesis is actually describing, it's describing the commencement of the Hebrew calendar system. And the 6 periods of creation is actually referring to their dividing the cycle of the moon into 6 segments, and a 7th segment where it rests. You know, we say that God worked for 6 days and he rested on the 7th day. This actually refers to the moon god sign, S-I-N. This is what the name of the moon god. I mean, the Semitic people, historically, anciently, I mean, and even today it holds over, they were worshipers of the moon god. You know, some people worship the sun god. They worship the moon god. The Semitic people, that includes the Arabs, the Jews, the Akkadians, who ruled the land of the Mesopotamian area there about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, whenever it was. These were Semitic people, and they worshiped the moon god sign. And this moon god refers to the moon. So, the God working 6 days and resting on the 7th, and like I say, I'm just giving an overview. A detailed explanation of this, I believe, is in Book 3. the first chapter of Book 3. But the resting period where God rests, I prove with all the provided information on the cycles of the moon and so forth. This is actually referring to when the moon rests, which it rests for, it goes into darkness, 2 days and 5 hours and 11 minutes and 20 seconds of every cycle. The moon goes into darkness, whereas we can't see its light. That was referred to as resting. And now you notice, if you read this portion of Genesis about creation, some people think that the editors made a mistake, but on the first day of creation, God created light. But then, on the fourth day of creation, God created light again. It says that God created the sun and the moon on the fourth day of creation. Well, it started off on the first day it created light. But the point is, they didn't make a mistake. This is right in accord with the symbolism. Because they're talking about, in this scenario, the phases of the moon. The moon begins with the new moon, which is the first sliver of light. And after the moon progresses, waxes in its light, as they say, from the first stage to a middle stage to the last stage, it hits the fourth stage, or the beginning of the fourth stage, where it is a full moon. So in this, you have the first creation of light given to you in Genesis that's occurring on the first day, and the fourth day, light being created all over again. That is referring to the new moon on the first day and the full moon on the fourth day. And then on through the fifth and sixth day, God rested. Why? Because that's when the cycle ends and the moon goes into darkness, into a resting period that lasts 2.5 days. And like all the details, like I said, are given in my book. And in fact, even the Jews themselves have provided us with so much data on this. It's easy to prove what I've just given an overview of, because they set the beginning of creation of the world at 3761 BC on a Monday, Jewish time, at 5 hours, 11 minutes and 20 seconds, which in our mode of keeping time, it would be 11 p.m. And 11 minutes and 20 seconds on a Sunday. But with them, of course, their day beginning at 6 o'clock in the evening, this is their Monday. But their records of creation, as they give it in their religious teaching, take us back to that time, to the exact date and day. In fact, they give the date of this creation as a time equivalent to a October 7th, as I said, on a Monday. But anyway, when you check the star charts for that date, you can actually see that that date is the date of when the new moon appeared in 3761 BC. This creation story, that's what it's describing. The beginning of their calendar system with the new moon of 3761 BC on a Monday Jewish time at 5 hours and 204 parts of halakam, if I'm saying it right. They use the term halakam. It's derived from a helic, which covers 3 1/3 seconds. But anyway, that's just further corroboration. Once your audience choose to read that, they'll find the details, graphs, and all the proofs that show that this thing that we call religion, it can be traced back to the tracking of time. and the various myths or stories in the Bible are really symbolic tales of astronomical interactions.
Okay. Well, listen, I was going to say we've been on here about an hour now, and I was wondering, have we covered everything that you wanted to cover, or are there some things I've missed?
No, not too much. I'm going to say one other thing right quick, because I want to force home the thought that we're dealing with the tracking of time. A lot of people, they ask me, how can religion be astronomy? It's hard. They have trouble making that connection. And like I say, it really requires a little study. But once you start studying, you see the connection of it right away. But it's not knowledge that can be transmitted just verbally. You have to really look into it. If it interests you to do so, and you see the connection. But what I want to mention before our expires is that even with this scenario about, say, Noah and the Great Flood, and being that there's been so many floods reported throughout ancient history in various parts of the world, people think that's a true story of a flood. But actually, that story is pure mythology, and I've shown the astronomical correlations to that story. And the best clue to show that Noah was actually a calendar and not a person is that the flood is shown as starting on his 600th birthday. On the first day of the month, it coincided with his 600th birthday. And the flood waters are said to have subsided on his birthday, on his 601st birthday. After exactly 1 year. That's a clear indication that this flood story is really some type of time-keeping event which measures the course of one tropical year. And the 40 days rain, the 150 days that the Bible tells us of the waters wreaking havoc before the boat landed upon the mountain of Ararat, what have you, which actually refers to the vernal equinox. And the 40 days, I've explained that several times in just about all the books, the 40 days rain, what that symbolizes. What I say, within my book, the exact correlations are shown that proves beyond any reasonable doubt that Noah was a calendar and not a person.
Okay. That would make perfect sense.
And because it's pure mythology, and once you get into the details of it, and the correlations, they fit so beautifully, it's just hard for a rational mind to deny that the Bible, Quran, and so forth are actually not historical books, but books of astronomical symbolism in great part.
And they all tell the same basic story.
Yeah, all same basic story over and over again. Exactly.
All righty. Well, I got to tell you, it's been a fascinating hour, and it sounds like you got a lot of details covered in your books that it probably takes some time to read and some time to absorb. I would really recommend anybody to look into them and to